Hello friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Prashant Kaushik and today I intend to introduce to you Emil Durkheim. In this video, we will just build an overview of him. Emil Durkheim in your syllabus is mentioned 4 topics in front of his name: division of labor, social fact, suicide, religion and society. But besides these 4 topics, we also find him relevant in a number of other places which are mentioned in your syllabus, such as his sociology of science, such as topics related to positivism. Then there is a chapter on there is a topic number 8 on religion, and there is a topic relationship of sociology with other disciplines. So in all these topics also and a number of other places, we can find Emil Durkheim really very relevant and important. So friends, let's be very keen when we study Emil Durkheim. Now, Emil Durkheim was born in 1858. He lived till around 1919. No one is going to ask you his duration, but still just to have an idea you need to know. When we think about Emil Durkheim, there are 3 things which are very peculiar about him, and these 3 things we will notice will be recurrent in almost most of his works. These 3 things are love for scientific methods, love for scientific methods. Second is his desire to set up sociology as a separate discipline. And third is his strong hatred for social disorder, that is anarchy, chaos. He really hated these things, and his life was also impacted by these things, and he was very worried that why ever since French Revolution so many times we had to change our constitution, so many times they were overthrown, there were 3 times republic was set up, so many different changes in the kind of governments we had. People were not following morality, there was hatred against Jews and minorities. So basically, he was very much upset with the social disorder, and he really wanted social order to come up. And he, in all his theories, he would be looking up at different things like division of labor, like religion, that how they bring up social order. So the third is social order. Remember, this will help you analyze all his work. These 3 things we will notice in most of his work. For example, social fact. Now, social fact. Why he came up with this idea of social fact? Emil Durkheim it's around 1882 onwards, or around 1880 and 1890s also. He was trying very hard to set up sociology as a separate discipline. These days we have sociology in so many universities. You are taking it up as an optional in your exams. But back in those years, 1880s, sociology was not yet accepted as a separate discipline, and the existing disciplines would often question that why do you need to set up a new discipline like that? Especially, maximum criticism was provided by the professors of these 2 disciplines. One was philosophy, other was psychology. So think it like this, imagine like this, that everyday professors from these 2 people, the crowd from these 2, psychology and philosophy, would gather around his cabin and throw abuses at him and say that stop this sociology thing. And one day he was really irritated and he threw a paper stone at them. And on the paper he had written social fact. Basically, that was the power of social fact. The concept of social fact, he demonstrated his resistance towards these 2 disciplines, and he charted out a separate territory for sociology. So what was that social fact? In social fact, he says 3 things. He says that social facts are forces and structures that are external and coercive to individual. They are coercive, they are external to individual. They should be treated as things and they are generalized in nature. These four words, if you remember, then you can write on this definition. We will take up this thing in detail also. Just as in the introductory class on ML Durkheim, I'm just introducing to you these things. And now, when he said external to individual, what he meant? He said social facts are forces and structures that are external to individual, such as law, such as culture, such as the kind of education system, such as bureaucracy, such as architecture. All these things are external to individual. You and me have not individually invented these things. These things have been existing for many hundred years before we took birth. We can't change them either. So these things are outside an individual. And if they are outside an individual, you cannot study it from an individual standpoint. So that is why you need to get outside an individual. That is why psychology cannot study these things. On the other hand, philosophers were saying, okay, we are people who study about religion, we are people who study about culture, religion, all these things. So what's the big deal? We can study them, we don't need you. Then ML Durkheim said that social fact should be treated as things. In this way, and notice the word fact in social fact. By this he wanted to say that we will study social fact empirically, we will do experiments, we will do observation, and then we will study them. For example, suppose there is a thing called religion. Now, suppose there is a question like this: does religion create unity in society? How would a philosopher would attempt to it? A philosopher would say and think that, okay, since all human beings are made by God, then religion should promote equality and unity in the society. That is, he will come up at the end conclusion while sitting in his own room. But this is not how ML Durkheim would proceed to answer this question. ML Durkheim would say that we will go out in the field, we will study a community, we will see, are they very much associated with religious structures, religious institutions? If yes, are they united? We will take the help of statistics to observe it. And on the basis of statistics, we will say, okay, this society is strong, is very much religious. Is there greater unity? If yes, then yes, religion promotes unity. If there is not unity, then we will say that religion does not promote unity. So based on what they observe and experiment, the sociologists will come up with their findings. In this way, they will rely on doing experiments. They will not sit back in their rooms, in their verandas and sit like a philosopher would. So in this way, we see that social fact is something through which Emile Durkheim busted the attacks of both psychologists and philosophers. And since social fact is something which exists outside our brain, it exists in the collectivity, then you cannot study it only by relying on your brain. You have to go out and do experiments. So we will do it in more detail. We will study social facts in greater detail. This is just an example to show what Emile Durkheim meant by social fact. And we also get to know not just his concept of social fact, but we also get to know methodology of social fact. That is why I said Durkheim is relevant outside these four topics also. So we get to know the subject matter of sociology. For Emile Durkheim, subject matter of sociology is social fact. For Emile Durkheim, the methodology in sociology is scientific methods. For Emile Durkheim, sociology is very different and separate from psychology and philosophy. There are no meeting grounds. So in this way, social fact will help us in many other topics also. Also, division of labor, society, religion and society, these are also social fact according to Emile Durkheim. Now, let us see what he meant by, take any other topic, like suicide. Suicide was also the topic of suicide was studied by Emile Durkheim so as to demonstrate to psychologists that see, we can study a topic which apparently looks in your domain, which looks like as if it belongs to your domain. Psychology is something suicide is something which is apparently very personal in nature. A person would kill himself but for no one but himself. But Emile Durkheim was able to demonstrate that the chances of people going for suicide in a society, that is, the suicide rate in a community, depends upon many social factors, such as the extent to which people are integrated with the society and the extent to which their lives are regulated by society. So, on the basis of how much they are integrated, too much integrated or too less integrated, and how much they are regulated, too much regulated or too less regulated, in all these four kind of scenarios, we have four kind of suicides. Too much of integration, there will be altruistic suicide. For example, a soldier laying down his life for the victory and honor of his battalion and his country. He will not fear death. He will walk into the face of the death. Even if he knows that he will not survive, he will still fight till the end. He is kind of killing himself for the honor and dignity of his countrymen or his battalion. That is, he is for altruism. Basically, he's for the. So, if this undercurrent of altruism is there, we can see suicidal tendencies. So, in Durkheim's vocabulary, or if there is no integration at all, just the opposite of it. For example, people have no family, they are all living as bachelors. Or if religion has faded, people are not binded to religion, then also there will be high suicide rate. Similarly, if there is too much of regulation, that is, what you eat, what you wear, whom you marry, all is decided by regulations of the society, then you feel like a slave and you will do suicide. For example, a boy and a girl who are madly in love with each other, they want to marry, but the society does not allow them to marry just because they belong to different caste groups or to maybe same Gotra. Then society will not allow them to marry, then they will kill themselves. This is an example of fatalistic suicide. So, and just opposite to fatalistic suicide, we could have anomic suicide, when there is no regulation, when the collective conscience breaks apart. An example of anomic suicide is when there is economic depression. So just like we are fighting against coronavirus, and people are saying, scholars are saying that we are waiting for great economic depression. People will lose jobs. So in such scenarios, when economic depression is there, people lose jobs, then also suicidal tendencies increase. So friends, in this way, Emile Durkheim was able to demonstrate that how something which apparently looks a very personal decision is ultimately, it depends upon a host of social factors, host of other social facts, and that is why we need a new discipline to study society. That is why psychologists can't do it. Psychologists can't do it because what we're doing is outside their domain, and philosophers can't do it because their way is different. They don't rely on scientific methods. Next, take up a topic, all these topics are integrated to a great extent. Take up a topic like division of labor. For Emile Durkheim, division of labor is something which brings unity in the society. Why? For example, me, I'm very good in teaching, but I'm not good at maintaining my car, or I can't even cut my hair properly, or I don't know how to go for a surgery for myself, I can't operate myself. So for all these cases, I depend on a surgeon or a car mechanic or a barber, and they depend on me. They would send their children to me for getting educated. So in this way, all of us are dependent on each other, and all of us need each other, and in this way we are all united, and this is what Durkheim called organic solidarity. He says that this organic solidarity is a feature of modern day society, and in the ancient societies or in the primitive societies where everyone looks like everyone else and where everyone does the same work which everyone else is doing, he says people are united because they resemble to each other very much, because they do the same work, because they are all the same, and this is his mechanical solidarity. So he will differentiate between the old society and the new society. And in this way, he's looking at division of labor with a positive connotation. He's appreciating the role of division of labor. If you remember, or if you have seen, or you must be knowing, Karl Marx. Karl Marx was very critical of division of labor. For him, division of labor is a system which has been designed by the dominant class, that is the factory owners, that's the bourgeois, to exploit the workers, that's the proletariat. So the bourgeois is exploiting the proletariat, that is for Karl Marx, division of labor smacks of exploitation. But for Emile Durkheim, division of labor is a great thing. It brings unity in society. So that is how we will compare Emile Durkheim with other scholars. So division of labor is also a social fact for Emile Durkheim. And friends, one more thing of social fact was there. I was telling you that how it tells us about his methodologies. It's not just his love for science, which we see in social fact. We also see cause and effect thing. Because when we were studying society, we were studying that one social factor is giving rise to some other social phenomena. So social fact is a product of other social fact. That is, this thing is being caused by this thing. So this is the cause, this is the effect. In a way, cause and effect also something which Emile can use in his methodologies. So in this way, social fact will help us know about his methodologies. Next, we can take up his topic like religion and society. Again, friends, see, I told you three things with which Emile Durkheim is very much obsessed with. His love for scientific methods, his desire to set up a new discipline called sociology, and his desire to bring social order. His desire to bring social order in society. So he again looks at religion and he says that religion is something which will play a positive role in bringing all people together. We will also see his love for scientific methods and his approach in studying religion. He will go back to a primitive religion based in Australia or in Detroit, and he will study that. This is very different from Weber. Weber was studying the modern day religions, the Protestants, and how Protestants would contribute to economy and how that would lead to growth of capitalism. We will take that in subsequent days. But this is the difference between Emile Durkheim and Weber if we compare. That Weber looks at the modern day religion, Emile Durkheim looks up at the primitive religion, because in primitive religion is in its pristine form. It has not been corrupted by other factors, and it's easier to study it scientifically in primitive religions. That is why he went for primitive religion, and he noticed and he said that all religions are same in this thing. And see, Emile Durkheim will not be concerned about God, ghost, prophet, these kind of things, heaven, hell. No, he is concerned about how religion is actually affecting the life of people in real terms. So he has said that religion creates unity in people. And he says religion is nothing but it's a mechanism where society gives great regard to its own beliefs and values. It assigns some sacred values to some objects. That is, the religion divides the whole world into domain. One is sacred, other is profane. Sacred is something special, which needs to be kept apart. Profane is something which is everyday affair, routine. So like, if you heard, there's a background sound of cow in the background. So cow is a sacred animal for Hindus. And all other animals are profane. So cow is holy, but buffalo is not, even though both give the milk. So something is special and something is not. This idea of sacred and profane, which Emile Durkheim discussed in his study of religion, can we apply this in modern day phenomena? Is our tricolor sacred to us? When we combine these three colors, saffron, white, green, and then with the blue chakra, then blue wheel, then it gives rise to a sacred thing for us, something which is special for us. Otherwise, this dress or any other dress is profane. We can throw any other dress in the dustbin, but we will not throw our national flag. We will respect our national flag. Similarly, we will not show disrespect to those things which we consider sacred. For example, Hindus will not disrespect the car. For example, Muslims, who they will consider the number 786 in high regards. For example, Christians will consider the cross in high regards. So, this is how something is special, something is sacred, and the other things are not. And the sacred things, they remind people of certain values and belief system which the society thinks are good. So if a society thinks non-violence is very important, then the sacred things will send the message of non-violence. The sacred things will symbolize the virtues of non-violence in a society which gives high regards to non-violence. So in this way, society is just reflecting upon its own values. So sacred items are nothing but a mirror to the society, in which society can look up to itself. So religion is just a way for the society to worship itself. Religion is nothing but the worship of the society. Society worship itself. We will do it in detail, nothing to worry about. And again we see that how Marx will be so different to Durkheim. Durkheim wants to bring social order in the society. He wants to bring peace in the society. And for that he sees that religion has a great role to do. Societies which are religious in nature, they have greater unity, and they have good collective conscience, good sense of morality. But for Karl Marx, religion is a block to reforms and development. For Marx, religion is a block to human progress. Why? Because Marx believes that religion is the opium of masses, and until people get rid of the bondage of religion, they can never go for revolution. This will again be a difference. In this way, we will see that while Marx would call for a revolution, for a change, for a better world, Durkheim would want for a reform. Some people criticize Durkheim for being conservative. Well, it's controversial. To a certain extent, Durkheim was conservative. The way he wanted reform only. He never wanted revolution. The way he paid great importance to religion and social solidarity and things like this, he looked like a conservative person. But he was also inheriting certain elements of enlightenment. In the way he was talking about reforms, in the way he was displaying his love for scientific methods, and so he was a mix of both. He was enlightened. He inherited elements of enlightenment also, and he inherited elements of this conservative traditions also. Nevertheless, more contemporary sociologists, they often criticize Durkheim for being a conservative. But we do see that if there was, as long as sociology is there, Emile Durkheim would be remembered. Emile Durkheim has a great importance in sociology. But yes, there have been criticism also, we will study those criticism in great detail. There is criticism such as Emile Durkheim fails to see the problems in the society. Though Durkheim talks about a concept like anomy or normlessness, we will take up that in subsequent videos. But still, the overall charge against Emile Durkheim is that he does not consider the bad things in society, is only obsessed with the good things in the society. And another charge against Emile Durkheim is that he is too much obsessed with positivism or scientific methods, and not every aspect of society is fit to be studied by scientific methods. So non-positivist and anti-positivist, basically the scholars who are against the usage or glorification of scientific methods, for example, those who want interpretation like Weber, or those who want also to incorporate certain elements from mind and like need, those kind of people, they would discard Durkheim's obsession with scientific methods. Also, they would say that Durkheim considered as if individual is completely helpless before the society, and individual has no autonomy or no existence in front of society. So there are many criticisms, we will see that in detail. But in spite of all these criticisms, we can still say that Emil Durkheim is really has been an influential figure. Talcott Parson, another thinker which is in your syllabus, who was greatly influenced by Emil Durkheim. In fact, he was the person who really made Emil Durkheim popular in the United States of America, and Talcott Parson, he made him popular as the founder of, or as the father of sociology. And besides that, we see a lot of relevance of Emil Durkheim even today. These words like ceremonies, rituals, collective effervescence, these are very relevant even today. So just a few days ago, our Prime Minister, he gave call for people to display their solidarity by coming on their balconies and eat thalis and all, as a tribute to the nurses and doctors and the medical staff who are working for us. Or one day he asked people to light up a lamp. So when all the people, they do the same thing, in the same way, at the same time, with the same thought, then they feel a lot of motivation and positive energy amongst them. They feel very enthusiastic and motivated, and they feel united. For this, Emil Durkheim used the word collective effervescence. Effervescence means when the bubbles come up, just like when you put the milk on the stove and you put the flame at the highest level. So the milk will come up and rise. Similarly, motivation in people come up and rise. And this is what he calls collective effervescence, which happens when people participate in rituals and ceremonies in religion. So in this way, religion is again uniting people. So, and if it's not religious activities, similar activities when done at the large scale can also give positive motivation and energy upliftment to people. Just like we see in a cricket match or in a sports stadium, where people just are chanting the names of their teams or the country. They all get united and they all get very much energized. So in this way, Emil Durkheim is still relevant. So friends, we have a lot to study about Emil Durkheim. This was just an overview of Emil Durkheim. We will study up all these topics in great detail in the coming sessions. Thank you.